All right, strap yourselves in because today we are going deep into the world of David Icke.
Oh boy, are we.
This is going to be a wild one.
Yeah, Icke, that guy, the reptilian overlords guy.
Yeah, but there's way more to Icke than just the reptilians.
So much more.
Talking about a guy who went from a pro football player to a well-respected sports broadcaster
Yeah,
to, well, one of the most famous conspiracy theorists on the planet.
exactly. And it's that journey, that transformation that really fascinates me,
Yeah.
How does someone go from, commentating on football matches
Mhm.
to claiming the world is run by shape-shifting lizards?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
Was he always like this, or is there some event that kind of flipped a switch?
I mean, you gotta wonder, was there a turning point? Was he always predisposed to this way of thinking? Or did something happen that sent him down this path?
Grifter or gifted? I guess that's what we're here to figure out.
Exactly.
So before we get to the reptilians and all that, let's rewind a bit.
Yeah, let's go back to the beginning.
Let's go back to the beginning, to Icke's early life.
Okay, so surprisingly, he had a pretty normal upbringing.
Yeah.
Yeah, born in Leicester, England in 1952.
Okay.
He was really into football.
As you do in England.
As you do, yeah. And he actually played professionally for Coventry City.
Wow, no kidding. So he was a legitimate athlete.
He was, and then he transitions into sports journalism, which makes sense, right?
Sure.
And eventually, he lands a gig as a presenter for the BBC.
Okay, so we're talking about a well-respected mainstream media figure at this point.
Oh, absolutely. This is not someone you typically associate with, fringe conspiracy theories.
Not at all.
He was the face of football for many people.
So when did things start to change? When did things get a little weird?
Well, the late 1980s seemed to be the turning point.
Okay.
He starts getting more and more into New Age philosophies, even joins the Green Party for a bit.
Interesting.
But the real catalyst, the moment everything seems to shift, is in 1989 when he has this profound experience with the psychic.
Okay, tell me more about this.
So he goes to see the psychic, and she basically tells him that he's on Earth for a special purpose.
A special purpose, huh?
Yeah, and that he's going to start receiving messages from the spirit world.
Okay, now that's pretty wild.
It is, and it really seems to have had a profound impact on him. Like, his entire worldview just kind of gets flipped on its head.
It's like a before and after moment.
Absolutely, and it's not long after this that his newfound beliefs start clashing with his professional life.
Oh.
Yeah, just a year later, he's famously sacked by the BBC after refusing to pay the poll tax.
Wow, so he's already starting to make waves, taking a stand for what he believes in.
Exactly. He's not afraid to ruffle some feathers.
And then there's that infamous appearance on Terry Wogan's show, right?
Oh, yeah. Can't forget that. The same year he gets sacked, he goes on Wogan, which is like the biggest talk show in Britain at the time.
Yeah.
And he declares himself the Son of God live on national television.
I've seen the clips. It's incredible.
It's hard to even describe.
The audience is just like, what is going on?
Yeah, they're laughing, they're bewildered.
It's almost like, are we being punked? Is this a joke?
Right, and you have to wonder, what was Icke thinking? Was he serious? Or was he, I don't know, trying to get a rise out of people?
Well, Icke himself has said that this interview was a defining moment for him, like a media crucifixion.
Wow. He
He knew he'd face ridicule, but he felt like it was a necessary step to fully embrace his true identity and purpose.
It's fascinating, right? Because it could be interpreted in so many ways.
Totally. Is this genuine belief, or is this a calculated move to gain notoriety?
It's the question that hangs over everything else, I think.
Yeah, and it's a question that we're going to have to keep coming back to as we dig deeper into Icke's world.
Absolutely.
Because from this point on, there's no turning back. He fully dives into the world of conspiracy theories, and his claims, well, let's just say they get a lot more out there.
Oh, yeah, this is where things get really interesting. And by interesting, I mean completely bonkers.
I mean, we're talking about the idea that the world is controlled by a secret cabal of reptilian humanoids.
When you say it like that, it does sound a bit crazy, doesn't it?
Just a bit.
But hey, that's David Icke for you.
So let's unpack this, the reptilian elite theory. What is it all about?
All right, so according to Icke, these reptilian beings, he calls them the reptilian elite.
Catchy.
They're essentially shape-shifting entities disguised as humans, and they're pulling the strings of everything. Governments, banks, the media, you name it.
Shape-shifting lizards. I mean, where does he even get this from?
Well, he claims his information comes from a mix of things: psychic visions, historical research, his interpretation of ancient texts.
Okay, so Not exactly peer-reviewed scientific journals.
Not quite.
But is there any, like, historical or mythological basis for this idea?
He often points to the Anunnaki, which are these, reptilian deities from ancient Babylonian myth.
Okay.
And he also talks a lot about the Draco constellation, as in, like, the constellation of the dragon.
As if they're coming from there, these reptilians.
Yeah, like it's their home planet or something.
It's wild stuff.
It is, but you can't deny that it's creative, it's imaginative.
I'll give him that.
He's definitely not boring.
No, not at all.
But it's also, incredibly disturbing when you think about it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is not just harmless fantasy. This kind of thinking can have real-world consequences.
Absolutely. But we'll get into that a bit later.
Yeah, we've got a lot more to unpack here.
A whole lot more.
So buckle up, folks, because this deep dive into the world of David Icke is just getting started.
This is just the tip of the iceberg, trust me. Okay, so remember that problem, reaction, solution thing we talked about?
Yeah, the framework Icke uses to explain, well, pretty much everything, right?
Right. It's central to how he sees the world.
It's like a conspiracy theory about conspiracy theories.
Exactly. The idea is that the powers that be, those reptilian overlords, they engineer crises.
To manipulate the public.
Yeah, to manipulate us into accepting solutions that, well, advance their agenda, whatever that might be.
It's giving them a lot of credit, isn't it? Like they're masterminds controlling every little detail.
It does seem a bit far-fetched.
But I mean, is there any historical basis for this idea? Do governments actually exploit crises to push through policies?
Well, there are definitely examples of governments using fear and crisis to justify expanding their power.
Yeah, think about the Patriot Act after 9/11.
Exactly. That's a prime example.
But to say that every major event is orchestrated by a secret cabal of, lizard people, that's a pretty big leap.
It is, but I think that's part of what makes Icke so appealing to some people.
How so?
He takes these complex, often abstract anxieties about the world, things like government overreach, corporate greed, the loss of individual liberty.
Yeah, stuff that we all worry about.
Right, and he boils it down to this very simple, albeit outlandish, narrative.
It's the lizard people. It's not our fault.
Exactly. It's not that systems are flawed. It's that lizard people are running the show.
It's almost like a perversely comforting thought, right?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a clearly defined enemy, even a fantastical one, then at least there's someone to blame.
Someone to fight against.
It creates a sense of purpose, like you're in the know, you're fighting this hidden evil.
And that can be really appealing, especially when the world feels so chaotic and out of control.
Absolutely. It's like a sense of order in the midst of chaos.
Right. But this simplification, this black and white thinking, it comes at a cost, doesn't it?
It does, because when you start attributing everything to a grand conspiracy, it becomes very easy to dismiss legitimate concerns.
To reject evidence, to demonize anyone who disagrees with you.
Exactly. You're either with us or against us.
And that's where things get really dangerous, right?
Right, because it shuts down critical thinking, it closes off debate.
And that's something we're seeing play out in Icke's views on the internet.
Oh, yeah. He's got some strong opinions about the internet.
He argues that the internet, which was initially intended for free information flow, is now being controlled by tech giants.
To suppress dissenting voices, to silence anyone who challenges the mainstream narrative.
Which, ironically, feeds right back into his core conspiracy theory.
Right, this idea that a powerful elite is manipulating events and controlling the flow of information.
It's that classic "they don't want you to know the truth" trope.
So effective, so good at fueling distrust and paranoia.
And Icke positions himself as this lone voice of truth, fighting against the powers that be.
The brave rebels speaking truth to power.
And that's a powerful image, especially for people who already feel marginalized or distrustful of authority.
It makes him a martyr, a hero even.
But it's a dangerous game he's playing, isn't it? Because once you go down that path, it's hard to come back.
It is, and it can lead to some pretty extreme views, like his stance on vaccines.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
He's been very vocal in his opposition to vaccines.
Calling them a form of gene therapy and making all sorts of false claims about their effectiveness.
Which have been repeatedly debunked, by the way.
By actual scientists and medical experts.
But that doesn't seem to deter him or his followers.
And that's what's so concerning, right? This is not just some abstract debate.
It's real-world stuff with real-world consequences.
People are making life-altering decisions based on this misinformation.
It's putting people's health at risk.
And it highlights this tension between freedom of speech and the responsibility to prevent the spread of harmful information.
Exactly. Where do you draw the line?
I mean, Icke has been banned from several social media platforms
Yeah, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, they've all taken action against him.
for spreading COVID-19 misinformation.
And, it's understandable why they would do that.
Of course, they have a responsibility to protect their users.
But it also raises questions about censorship, about who gets to decide what information is allowed and what isn't.
It's a tricky issue, no easy answers.
It is, but it's a conversation we need to have.
Absolutely, because the stakes are high.
So we've talked about problem reaction solution. We've talked about the internet, vaccines, but we haven't even touched on one of his most out there theories yet.
Oh yeah, the Saturn Moon Matrix.
That's right. Buckle up, folks, because this one's a doozy.
What exactly does he believe is happening with the moon?
Okay, so are you ready for this? He claims that the moon is not a natural celestial body.
Wait, what?
Yeah, he says it's a hollowed out spacecraft,
A spacecraft?
broadcasting a false reality to keep humanity enslaved.
Okay, this is where I have to say, even for me, this is getting a bit too much.
It's out there, for sure.
A hollow moon broadcasting a fake reality.
That's what he says.
It sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie.
It does, but remember, we're trying to understand why these ideas appeal to people.
And this theory, while crazy, it does tap into that very human desire for simple explanations.
Right. It replaces a complex, chaotic universe with a puppet master.
Right.
Even if that puppet master is, reptilian.
There's a cosmic conspiracy theory.
Exactly. It's not just that you're feeling lost and insignificant in this vast universe. You have a purpose.
You're part of this grand battle against a hidden enemy.
It's seductive even if it's completely bonkers.
Totally. It's like the truth is out there, and Icke is the only one who can see it.
He's the chosen one.
Which, again, plays into that whole distrust of modern science and academia,
He's like the anti-establishment guru.
offering secret knowledge that's been hidden from the masses.
It's a powerful narrative.
And it's made him a very successful man.
Oh, yeah, he's not just some fringe figure ranting in a basement.
He's got books, lectures, a huge following.
People are paying for this stuff.
And that's what makes him so controversial, right?
Yeah, because is he genuinely trying to help people, or is he just exploiting their fears for his own gain?
Is he a grifter, a gifted visionary, or maybe a bit of both?
It's the question that keeps coming up.
And it's a question with no easy answers.
Because Icke is a master of blurring those lines.
But one thing's for sure, his popularity isn't without its critics.
Oh, there are plenty of critics.
People who see him as a dangerous demagogue, a purveyor of misinformation.
And they have good reason to be concerned.
Because his beliefs have real-world consequences.
Especially when it comes to things like vaccine hesitancy.
There's a study from King's College London that found that people who trust Icke are more likely to be skeptical of vaccines.
And they're more likely to have experienced conflict with loved ones over vaccination.
So it's not just about abstract beliefs.
It's affecting people's relationships, their health, their lives.
It's dividing families and undermining trust in public health measures.
And that's deeply concerning.
It's one thing to believe in reptilian overlords. It's another thing entirely when those beliefs lead to actions that can harm yourself or others.
Exactly. And it raises serious questions about Icke's ethical responsibility.
Is he knowingly exploiting vulnerable people?
Or does he genuinely believe what he's saying, even if it's harmful?
It's like, is he a true believer who's just misguided?
Or is he a con man, preying on people's fears for his own profit?
It's a tough call.
It is. And it's not just about vaccines either.
I mean, he's also been accused of promoting anti-Semitic views.
With his claims about a Rothschild Zionist conspiracy.
He denies those accusations, of course.
But the fact that they exist at all is troubling.
Because those kinds of ideas can have a very real and very dangerous impact on the world.
Absolutely. Words have power.
Especially when they come from someone with a platform as large as Icke's.
They can inspire, they can inform, but they can also incite hatred and violence.
And that's something we need to be very mindful of.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from problem reaction solution to vaccines to anti-Semitism.
It's been a whirlwind tour of Icke's worldview.
But I want to go back to that problem reaction solution framework for a moment.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that he sees historical events through that lens.
He does, and I think it's helpful to look at a specific example to really understand how he applies it.
Okay, let's do that. What's a good example?
Well, his interpretation of the 9/11 attacks is a classic case of problem reaction solution.
Oh, this should be interesting.
So, Icke, he doesn't believe the official account of 9/11.
Shock.
He claims it was an inside job.
orchestrated by...
The Illuminati, of course.
Okay.
And he sees it as a classic example of problem-reaction solution.
So walk me through this. How does he apply that framework to 9/11?
Okay, so the problem, the terrorist attacks, he believes that was either manufactured or at least allowed to happen by those in power.
The Illuminati, the Reptilians, whoever.
Right. Then the reaction is the public's fear and outrage.
Understandable.
And then the solution is increased security measures, military interventions, the erosion of civil liberties.
All the things that, according to Icke, those in power wanted all along.
It's a very cynical view of the world.
But it's a view that a lot of people find compelling.
It is, and I think it speaks to a deep-seated mistrust of authority.
Yeah, that feeling that we're being lied to, that there's a hidden agenda.
And whether or not you buy into Icke's specific claims, there's no denying that governments and powerful institutions do sometimes act in their own self-interest.
Right, even at the expense of the people they're supposed to serve.
So there's a kernel of truth in there somewhere.
But Icke takes that kernel and blows it up into this grand, all-encompassing conspiracy.
And that's what makes him so dangerous, in my opinion.
Because he taps into those legitimate concerns, those anxieties about power and control.
And then he twists them into these fantastical narratives that can lead people down a very dark path.
It's like he's playing with fire.
He is, and the consequences can be devastating.
So as we wrap up this section on Icke's problem-reaction-solution framework, I think it's important to remember that this is just one way of looking at the world.
It's a very specific lens, a very distorted lens.
And it's a lens that can lead to some pretty extreme conclusions.
So as we move forward, it's important to keep that in mind.
To be critical of what we hear, to question the sources, to do our own research.
Because the truth is out there, but it's not always easy to find.
Especially when you're dealing with someone like David Icke. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of David Icke. We've gone from pro footballer to respected sports broadcaster to, well, a leading voice in conspiracy theories.
It's been a wild ride, hasn't it?
Yeah, we've talked about shape-shifting reptilian overlords.
A hollow moon broadcasting a fake reality.
Yeah, and that whole problem-reaction-solution framework he uses to explain, well, everything.
From 9/11 to the COVID pandemic, you name it.
We've also talked about why his ideas appeal to people, even if they are, let's face it, pretty out there.
And the backlash he's faced, the criticism, the bans from social media, it's clear that Icke is a polarizing figure, to say the least.
Definitely. You either love him or you hate him. Or maybe you're just utterly confused by him.
Probably a bit of all three.
So as we wrap up this episode, I have to ask, where do you land on Icke? Is he a grifter, a visionary, or something in between?
You know, that's the million-dollar question, and I'm not sure I have a definitive answer.
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it?
He's such a complex figure, so hard to pin down.
It's that blend of charisma and controversy that makes him so fascinating, right?
Absolutely. He's a brilliant speaker. He knows how to weave a story, how to capture an audience.
Even if those stories are, well, a little out there.
A little, but you can't deny his impact. His ideas have resonated with millions of people worldwide.
And that's what makes him so intriguing, right? What is it about Icke that draws people in?
I think it's his willingness to challenge the status quo, to question everything.
He's not afraid to say the things that other people won't.
And in a world where so much feels uncertain, where people feel like they've lost control.
Icke offers a sense of clarity, of purpose.
He's saying, hey, it's not your fault, it's the lizard people.
Right, they're the ones pulling the string.
They're the enemy, and we need to wake up and fight back.
It's a seductive narrative, even if it is based on, well, some pretty wild claims.
Yeah, and that's where things get tricky. Because while Icke's ideas might be empowering to some,
they can also be incredibly dangerous.
They can lead to distrust in legitimate institutions, a rejection of science and reason.
And as we've seen with the anti-vaccine movement, it can have real-world consequences for people's health and well-being.
It's that fine line between freedom of thought and the responsibility to prevent harm.
Yeah, where does one end and the other begin? It's a tough question.
It is, and it's one that we all need to grapple with, especially in this age of misinformation and online echo chambers.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of David Icke,
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that we need to be more critical of the information we consume.
to question the sources, to look for evidence, to be willing to change our minds when presented with new information.
And to be aware of our own biases, our own tendencies to believe things that confirm our existing worldview.
It's easy to get caught up in a compelling narrative, especially when it's presented by someone as charismatic as Icke,
But we need to remember that not everything we hear is true.
and that sometimes the most outlandish claims are the ones that require the most scrutiny.
It's been quite a journey, this exploration of David Icke.
From football pitches to conspiracy theories, it's been a wild ride.
And hopefully we've given our listeners something to think about.
Some food for thought, some questions to ponder.
About the nature of belief, the power of narrative, and the importance of critical thinking.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mind-bending world of David Icke.
And until next time, keep those minds curious and those questions coming.
And remember, don't believe everything you hear, especially when it comes to shape-shifting reptilian overlords.